Right, good morning, everyone. I start making our way back into the pews. So thanks, everyone, for joining us this morning. It's the business portion of our church operations, but it's necessary to be able to keep things going. So appreciate all the time that you are, just in general, and also the commitments that you've made to St. Jacob's Mennonite Church. So I'm Ryan Clemmer. I am the chair of Leadership Council, and so I'll be kind of hosting the meeting this morning. So the first, what we need to do is establish quorum. And so as part of the bylaws or the incorporation of St. Jacob's Mennonite Church, we just have to make sure we have enough members here. So there's about 211 or so members. We need 10%, so we need at least 20. And this is the only vote that would be for those that are members. After this vote, anyone who's an active participant or a member can vote. But for this first one, it's only members of St. Jacob's Mennonite Church. So if you can raise your hand if you are a member of St. Jacob's Mennonite Church, we just want to get a count, see how many people were here. So. Okay, I got 48, so I counted everybody. So, yeah. I guess 48's divisible by 4. So you've got the 12 tribes of Israel. Yeah, and 4 left over. That. I guess it would be 50. Yeah. I guess what a traditional loaf of bread was cut into 12 slices, so maybe that's one for each tribe. And then I guess a baker's dozen was the 13, in case I think loaves were weighed, and so if you're a little bit short, you'd cut off that little extra slice so that you make your weight targets for baking. So we've got quorum, which is great, and now anyone who's actively participating can vote here on in. So first, this was done on October 16th. We need to approve the slate. Being that was done in October, we won't have to have a vote to accept the slate now, but it is to recognize that it's part of the AGM. I want to just note that Wolfgang Kohler had been vice chair. As you'll see there in the bylaw revisions, there's a stipulation that anyone that's on staff relations and or leadership council shouldn't be on either. So if you're on leadership council, then it should be separate from staff relations. If you're on staff relations, it should be separate from leadership council. And that's because the idea behind that is that staff relations should be a place where the pastors can speak in confidence. We can talk about that a little bit more when we look at the bylaws, but because Wolfgang he was vice chair and also on staff relations, he resigned from the I'm going to get this all mixed up. He resigned from leadership council and is remaining as staff relations. So I just want to recognize the time that Wolfgang had participated with leadership council, appreciated the time and effort that he put into that and the insights he's offered, and thankful that he's staying with staff relations because there'll be a busy time going forward as we look at the changing pastoral team. So this is just kind of more of a formality that the directors have been accepted, and that's part of the incorporation of St. Jacob's, and we have voted on that, and I'm just revisiting this here. Oops. So the next item on the agenda will be the acceptance of the minutes from the previous, the 2022 annual general meeting. And so I guess first, can I have someone put forward the motion to accept the minutes? Okay, Miriam? Yeah, Miriam Clausen. Can I have a seconder? Sandy Shantz? All right, now, are there any comments or questions regarding the minutes? All right, if not, then all in favor of accepting the minutes, you raise your hand. All right, any opposed? No, so that motion is carried. All right, thank you. All right, so now, I guess now we'll have, no, where are we at? Yes, so we'll go to the, looking at the response to the ministry reports. So Pablo Kim was asked to look through the various ministry reports and provide some reflections on that. So we've got a video.
Dear sisters and brothers of St. Jacob's Mennonite Church, thank you so much for offering me the opportunity to read and respond to your annual report and spending plans. After reading them carefully and prayerfully, here are my comments. First of all, by reading your report, I am learning that you are a vibrant community that invests significant amount of time and energy in planning and offering worship service, building community by caring for one another, actively practicing hospitality, and fostering a deeper relationship with people and organizations beyond your own circle. Through the report, I can see how you are embodying the church vision statement. I also noticed that in their own reports, various leaders using the term abundance and generosity. In spite of the uncertainties that the wave of Omicron has brought and the financial challenges that many families are experiencing, you have expressed that you have experienced abundance and generosities in your community. And out of your own experience of God's abundance, you engage in several ministries and dedicate a significant amount of offering to communities beyond your own church circle. I'm deeply touched to see that the second highest spending plan is the category beyond ourselves. 21.3% of the total budget. It's time for me to use a new idiom that I have recently learned. You are truly putting your money where your mouth is. As a person who works in the area of anti-racism, I strongly believe that intentionally welcoming and engaging with people from different racial, cultural, and ethnic backgrounds is part of discipleship. And I'm glad to see how you are welcoming and interacting with Grace Lao Mennonite Church, supporting a few refugee families, and building a relationship with people from 6 nations. It is by engaging with people who are different from us, we get to learn how limited our views are. And it is through others we get to have a broader and deeper understanding of God, the church, and the world. How our faith is lived out on the land where we dwell is a crucial aspect of discipleship as well. In this sense, I am grateful that by partnering with Burning Bush Forest Church, you are committing to take a small act of reparation for the broken covenant with the indigenous people and learning to respect the land and the natural environment. Taking care of our land and natural environment is as much, and some would argue, more important than taking care of our building facilities. As I prepared to respond, I also meditated on Mark 8 and listened to what the Spirit had to say. In Mark 8, 1-10, it is about the well-known passage of Jesus feeding the 4,000. The disciple and all the people who were there experiencing God's overflowing abundance. But then in the verses 14-21, we see Jesus talking about the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. But the disciples are not understanding what Jesus is saying. And so they began to talk about not having bread in their journey. And so Jesus asked, "Do you not yet understand?" It seems like Jesus wanted to reveal something important aspect of discipleship and God's kingdom through this experience of abundance. But the disciples were not understanding, getting, or seeing it. Like the story of the healing of the blind man that comes after the verses, the disciples will then slowly see partially and later understand fully. Based on this meditation, I'll end my response with the following questions. As a community who experience God's abundance, what is it that God is trying to reveal to you? What do you think Jesus wants you to understand and see? If God's abundance that you have experienced is a sign, what is this sign pointing toward? Where do you think the Holy Spirit is directing you to? Once again, thank you for this opportunity for me to share my response, and blessings to you all as you have your annual meeting. May the Spirit continually work through you and with you. Thank you.
I should have introduced the video. Mark put together something that I'll see if I can bring it up. But met with Pablo. He's involved with MCEC. There may have been, I think he shared a video with Dim Sum, and you may have seen that. Kimchi? Yeah. Here, just sorry, I better pull this up. So for the last number of years, we've invited someone from outside of St. Jacob's Mennonite Church to read through our SJMC report book and offer their observations. So over the last number of years, we've had people respond to the report book from each of the area churches across Canada. This year, we invited Pablo Kim to offer a video response to Intentionally Hear an Intercultural Voice. Pablo is an ordained pastor in MCEC, living in Toronto and working in anti-racism and intercultural conciliation in the Christian Reformed Church. Some of you may have seen his Zoom MCEC worship on kimchi making last year. Pablo and his wife, Gina, and their daughter, Loa, attended worship here in January and then joined us for Silver Lake Snow Weekend. And so thank you, Pablo, for sharing your thoughts. So a little, I guess, an outro as opposed to an intro. So based on the response there, and having either the video summaries or reading through the report book, are there any kind of questions or comments? All right, then I guess someone can move to accept the ministry reports as presented in the book. Okay, Marcia. And I have a seconder. That's Stephanie Kramer. All right, I guess, are there any further discussion? No? All right, so all in favor of accepting the ministry reports, can you raise your hand? All right, any opposed? All right, so that motion is carried. So thank you for that. All right, I'm not sure if Tim, you want to come up and present the financial reports? So I just want to thank Tim Bauman for all the work he's done as treasurer and dealing with the financials and the auditing. It's greatly appreciated all the time that you put into this, so thank you, Tim.
Good morning. 2022 has been a somewhat challenging year financially. We slipped behind in our giving for most of the year and started December down approximately $75,000. The giving in December was amazing, and combined with an underspend, we ended up with a deficit of just $5,400. In the annual report, you will see a deficit reported of just $1,394, and that may be slightly misleading. Because we did end the year in a deficit situation, we are legally not allowed to make interfund transfers that would increase the deficit. This meant that we could not make transfers of $4,000 that we were planning to do. So the true shortfall is the $1,394 plus the $4,000 that we could not transfer. Doug will talk more about this in the spending plan presentation. Since most of the COVID protocols have been lifted, we were able to have an on-site audit done this year, and that went much smoother and quicker than the audit by emails of the past 2 years. I will not go through the financial reports line by line, but will highlight some of the more important items. I will be looking at page 4 of the financial reports booklet from MAC. The 2021 surplus was $6,024, which was entirely transferred into the Refugee 2 Fund as we decided at last year's AGM. In 2022, we received a total of $31,000 in bequests. In consultation with the families, we decided to donate $14,000 of this to the Refugee 2 Fund and $17,000 to the Capital Fund to be used for upcoming projects by the AV Committee. The original Refugee Committee is finished, and we transferred the remaining $5,485 to the Refugee 3 Fund. $5,134 was transferred from reserves to the Refugee 2 Fund to complete a 2021 bequest, and $4,308 was transferred from reserves to the Peace, Justice, and Social Concerns Fund, also to complete a 2021 bequest. The Refugee 3 Fund is still in a waiting mode and has $27,763 available. The Capital Fund and the Reserve Fund combined have over a $90,000 balance, but we have committed approximately $56,000 of that to cover the cost of the elevator upgrades coming up in 2023. Once again, the congregation and friends of SJMC have been generous with total giving at over $436,000. Finance and Facilities Ministry appreciates your financial commitment and thanks you for your continued generosity. At this point, I would like to move that the financial statements of the corporation for the period ending December 31st, 2022 be accepted as presented.
Laverne Brubaker, here you go. Right, oops. All right, are there any discussion? Brent? Is there
Hi, just a question on the Refugee Sponsorship 2 fund. So it's still showing $15,398 there. And I thought from Marcy's report that's closed, but I just wasn't sure if that's still going to be dispersed or where that's sitting.
I'm not sure if, I think there was a little bit set aside as potential ongoing support, but I think better leave it to Tim.
And I don't have a good answer for that. You're right, the money is still sitting there, and we'll have to decide what to do with that. Potentially, it could be transferred to the Refugee 3 Fund.
Yeah,
But
I guess that would be our pattern if there's anything left there, but
yeah,
okay,
but
thanks.
that'll have to come from Leadership Council.
Yeah, and I guess, as Kevin was saying, as part of it was a bequest as well that was transferred there. And because the sponsorship just ended in September, I think just wanted a little bit, not completely close it off, just in case there's something that comes up that they would need support. Are there other questions, comments? All right, well, if not, then all in favor of accepting the financial reports, raise your hand. All right, any opposed? Oh, all right, that motion is carried. Thank you. All right, and now,
Can we just give a round of applause to Tim Bauman for all the work he puts into our financials? I don't know if this is the time to do it, but
sure.
Can we do it now?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. All right, so now, being Doug isn't able to be here in person, he did put together a video presentation on the spending plan for 2023. So we'll get that queued up, and we can listen to that, and then we can take any questions after.
Thank you, Tim, and good morning. I'm not able to join you in person today. However, I have pre-recorded my 2023 spending plan presentation, and we'll get to that in just a minute. I will go through the presentation, and then at the end of it, I will turn it over to Ryan, who will conduct the question and answer period. And don't be afraid to ask your questions. The members of Leadership Council are here, the members of Finance and Facilities are here, and I'm sure they will be able to answer any questions that you might have. So with any further ado, let's start the 2023 spending plan presentation. Before I get into the discussion about the 2023 spending plan, I'd like to spend a little bit of time reviewing the 2022 plan. I'm going to start with the areas of underspending, and starting with staff, we are underspent by $6,600, And this was made up of the office administrator not working quite as many hours as we had budgeted for. There is a reduction in office supplies spending. We're still trying to figure out what the post-COVID use of paper will be. Our new telephone contract finally kicked in, and we are reaping the savings there. Under congregational faith and nurture, $4,800 underspent. The audiovisual folks didn't spend anything for any upgrades. And a minimal amount, only $500 was spent on the ministry exploration. Under finance and facilities, they were $2,000 underspent. This was made up largely by not spending the building maintenance budget, and there was some overspending in snow removal. In terms of the transfer to internal funds, we did not do that $4,000 as I had stated in my previous report. And I just want to talk a little bit about that. There was a question of why we decided not to transfer the money to those funds rather than take us into a larger deficit. Well, the fact is it's not our decision. It is based on government accounting rules that when a charity, I believe, and certainly it applies to us, where you do not meet your spending plan, you cannot transfer to internal funds. And that probably stops certain charities from running a huge deficit but having internal funds with lots of money. So in the case of these funds that we have set up, they're set up so we can carry forward monies from one year to the next. When it goes into a budget, you spend it that year and that's it. But if you put it into a fund, the amounts can be carried forward. So you can understand reserve and capital funds, they're being put away for a rainy day. The Mission Partnership Fund is will be used when Benin folks come this way or when we send people over to Benin. And the Burning Bush Fund is a little bit unique in that it was set up to help them administer the funds that they collect on a Sunday morning or whenever they do collect funds from their attendees. We at SJMC set the fund up so that we could collect and disperse from there and receipt for there. And as a show of support, SJMC puts $1,000 into that fund every year. And so that is because they're internal funds. That's the rationale why we could not transfer that $4,000. On to the next page, continued on our spending plan. So our final spend then was $413,562. The donations towards the spending plan were $411,843, which left us with a deficit of $1,394, which we will carry forward into 2023. We're not going to have get rid of the deficit offering since the deficit is actually quite small. And for those of you that are quick to do some math, the difference between the final spending amount and the donations received doesn't equal $1,394 because I didn't factor in for the bank interest that is shown on the report. Overall, total donations through SJMC were $436,356. That would include donations of any kind towards any direct to the funds and or the amounts that went to the refugee fund. So there is always more funds donated to SJMC than goes to the spending plan. And one final note about the internal funds. Just to clarify, any individual donor can donate directly to those funds or designate donating to those funds. So, for instance, even though SJMC could not put the $1,000 into the Burning Bush Fund, any donor could designate to put in money towards the Burning Bush Fund at any time. And that would be one way to make up the $1,000 that we couldn't put in for 2022. So now we'll move into our 2023 spending plan assumptions. And the first one shown there is that we do follow MCEC guidelines for our pastors' salaries. In terms of calculating the future pastor's salary, we decided to use the same number for the last 6 months of the year as we do for the first 6 months of the year, and that being based on the amount that Kevin has been paid. We currently don't know what the full-time equivalent of the new person will be. We don't know when they might start. We don't know what their education and experience will be, and this affects salary. And so for that reason, we decided to just go with what we have there with Kevin's salary and do it for the last 6 months. And later on in the year, once we know what the actual cost might be for a new hire, we can maybe look at things again. Or we might leave the spending plan as it is. And if we meet our spending plan, and that would generate a surplus, and then we can look at where we might want to allocate that surplus. Another assumption is that the building must be maintained. We need to continue to do repairs and maintenance on our building. Yes, you can always let things slide, but it generally costs you more the longer you wait, so we will continue to spend money there. It is a reality that the number of donors continues to decline. When we look at the statistics, we have lost about 5 donor numbers over the last each year over the last number of years. And then just a matter of information there. A star to the left of the grid just means there is a change from the 2022 spending plan, either up or down for 2023. So now we'll move into beginning with the staff page to go through the 2023 proposed spending plan. So the first section on the staff page shows the salaries and costs for our staff. And as I had earlier stated, you will see the amount for Kevin for his 6 months and the new hire being the same at $28,272. Moving on to office expenses, we're still trying to figure out how much paper we will generate now that we have gone more electronic. Last year we spent $1,907 on that. We anticipate we'll probably spend a little bit more this year, so that was put in at $2,800. The telephone contract, the $1,600 you see there, is what the actual cost will be for this year. We actually signed a 3-year contract with Bell, and last year they didn't start charging us appropriately, and so they ended up giving us a credit, and that reduced it for 2022, but for 2023 it will be at $1,600, and I believe it's at least a 3-year deal, so we've got some good pricing there. Moving on to additional expenses. Car mileage, we put in at $3,000. That's up slightly from last year, but as things continue to open up, pastors will be doing more driving, as well as the remuneration per kilometer has gone up to reflect the increased cost for gasoline and other associated expenses. There is no conference this year, so that line shows as a 0. And Staff Relations Committee bumped their line up some to cover some additional costs for the pastoral search. So that brings us to a total of $241,750 for the 2023 spending plan for staff. That is up 8% over 2022 actual. So moving on to the next page, we'll talk about facilities. There, some of the bigger increases is under utilities. As you know, heat and hydro continue to go up. And as usage of our building goes up, those costs also increase. And so we have put in a number of $11,000 for heat, hydro, and water, I believe is all in that number. It's just something to note that when you are using the building, consider it using it the same way you use your house, and that is I'm sure you reduce water usage. You turn out lights whenever you can. I know you don't control the heating. Derek actually can control that and does a good job. When nobody is around in the sanctuary, it is kept at 16 degrees. And unless you're going to be in there for a long time, we'd appreciate if you would leave it at that number if you're in for a short period. Repairs and maintenance, we have put that in again at $14,000. The trustees have a number of projects they want to do, need to do. Winter outside work. This one really is a crapshoot. As you can see, we spent way more than we budgeted for in 2022. And maybe, hopefully, 2023 won't be as bad for snowfall. But it snowed every Sunday that we came to church, and so they had to plow, and they plowed regularly. Snowed little amounts, but they came and salted, and so we want to make sure we budget enough, so we put in $15,000 for that. Summer outside work, same token, the costs of doing that sort of thing have gone up for lawn mowing, and it also includes the cost to hire somebody to maintain the flower beds, since we were unable to find any volunteers to do that. Elevator maintenance, you'll see a decline there, and that is factoring in the fact by mid-year we will have done some revisions to the elevator, and so the maintenance contract will be lower. And you'll see the recovery for facility rental has increased to $5,000. That's the bonus to more usage of our facilities. You'll see the income was $3,100 in 2022, and we're anticipating it should go up again for 2023, so we put in $5,000. So that for facilities comes to $73,320 for 2023. That's up 9.4% from 2022. And then on the same page, we'll talk about the reserves. We have factored in or added in $1,000 each for the capital and reserve fund, because we do want to continue to replenish those funds going forward. Moving on to our next slide, congregational faith and nurture. Really not a lot of changes in the top part of the page, but going down under community and hospitality, the church directory has been completed, so we did not need to allocate anything for the directory in 2023. You see a slight increase in Life Together, and that is because the printery has taken on some more layout work that one of our members had previously been doing. And then if you go down to ministry exploration, we made a decision to not put any funds in there, because with the transition of pastors, we felt that probably there will be no student, nobody brought in to try ministry exploration, because it actually does take pastoral time to do that. And if we don't have a pastor or we're down a pastor during the summer, or a new pastor has come in, we felt that probably we would not be having the time to spend with a student coming. So that brings the overall number for 2023 for that page of $21,000. That's 15.6% increase over the previous year's spending. So turning the page to beyond ourselves, here's where some of the biggest changes have come, biggest reductions, and I'll talk a little bit more about it on the last summary page, but we have moved total Mennonite Church giving to $83,000 for 2023. We have eliminated our $2,000 giving to MCC and House of Friendship, those two being the fact that those are small tokens of support for those organizations, and they have a much broader base of support that they can draw from. the Mennonite story. We also cut that amount. We have not had any connection, or we had not had any contact from the Mennonite story. We knew they were being reorganized, and we had not heard anything at the time that we set up our spending plan. And it was interesting because within a week of us making our decision on this, we heard that they have moved or are moving to the cabin on the market and trying to get things going again. However, we were standing on our reduction there. So on that page, we come in with a 2023 spending plan of $91,700, spending beyond ourselves, and that is a 12.4% reduction from 2022. And on to the next slide, the summary slide. You can see there the numbers shown for each of the previous areas I outlined under the category totals. So our spending plan comes to $429,770. But then when you add in the deficit from last year of $1,394, the amount we require for 2023 is $431,164. Now that is flat to 2022 spending plan. That is an increase of 4.7% from 2022 donations towards the spending plan. And if we had left in the $15,000 that we cut from the beyond ourselves, it would be an 8.3% increase from 2022 donations. And we felt that as Finance and Facilities and Leadership Council, that 8.3 will be a little bit on the high side for our spending plan, and so that is why we made the changes that we did. I also wanted to talk about the categories by percentage. You can see that we've listed what the actual percentages are for 2023 spending plan, but in the past we used to have another set of figures showing what the ranges are that we're trying to achieve. And really those ranges were things that we gleaned from other churches from across North America as best a survey as we could do. And in reality, they were not our goals. They were just goals that other churches have. And so we decided to take those out for this year, and we'll leave them out until we get to the point where we can set our own goals. So that brings me to the conclusion of my presentation. Again, our total spending plan before the previous deficit we're proposing is $429,770. This was a difficult spending plan to formulate. Cutting anything is difficult, and I expect you may have some robust conversation around some of the things we have proposed. I want to give thanks to the Finance and Facilities Committee members for their contribution to helping out in the decision, as well to Leadership Council ministry leaders for their support in this spending plan proposal, as well as their diligent spending in each of their ministries to try and keep costs under control. Thank you again to Tim for all his work on the financial side of things, as well as Pauline for inputting the numbers. As well, I need to give thanks to my director and editor, Larry Shantz, who gave me some help in putting this presentation together. And finally, I would like to thank the congregation again very much for their continued generosity. As much as we focus on that we had a deficit this year, there's still many, many dollars that are contributed through SJMC through to the various causes. So thank you again to the congregation. So that concludes my presentation. At this point, I will say goodbye and wish you well in your conversation and discussion, and I will turn it back over to Ryan.
Thanks, Doug. And I just want to recognize all the work that Doug has put in, and the finance and facilities as well, and keeping the church going and taking care of the resources. And we can give an applause. And maybe this is counter to our heritage, but perhaps we should give each of you a round of applause too for all the time and generosity that you've provided over the last number of years. Because without everyone's time and money and donations, we wouldn't be able to meet together as a congregation. So how about a round of applause for you as well. So thank you for that. So maybe we'll just open the floor for any questions or discussions before we move to accept the spending plan. So.
I just want to offer my thanks as well to Finance and Facility for coming up with a budget that has a marginal increase. I know that all of our, there's been a lot of news about regional budgets and all that, and those have gone up as much or more than that, so I think that that's a good plan. And I also agree with the cut to MCC and House of Friendship, because, I mean, our household anyways donates to those organizations separately, and I agree that they have a broader support. My only concern with that is that they're left wondering why all of a sudden that we've stopped years of donations. So I wonder if there's any plan to just write a letter to each of those organizations just to let them know that we are discontinuing, not because we're not fully supportive of their work, but that our members will donate to those organizations separately anyways.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we can look to put together. A leadership council or finance and facilities could draft a note to send to those organizations to kind of outline what you mentioned with, appreciate the work that they do, but won't be able to support as a congregation going forward.
I can tell Art Clausen when I see him on Monday morning.
Okay.
About that, give him the news. He's the accountant for MCC where I work. On the serious side, I do, when I look at the spending, the spending plan is fantastic. It's always an amazing document to me. I'm really thankful for all the work that goes into it. And I also wonder, just looking at some of the numbers, projecting forward, 8% increase, average age of donors is 70, we're losing 5 donors a year. I joined this church 23 years ago as a member. 23 years from now, what's it gonna look like when those lines are all going in those directions? So I wonder if there's anything we can do now that'll make it easier for our future selves. When I'm in 23 years, I'll be over the average age of our donors right now. So yeah, what does that look like? In 5 years, we'll be fine. In 10 years, who knows? In 23 years, where will we be? So are there things we can do now to start planning for that and saying, what does our ministry look like way down the road, and how can we make sure that it can continue? Anyway, hopefully that's already happening, and maybe I'm saying something that everybody's already thought of.
Yeah, no, that certainly is a concern, and I guess to ensure the ongoing or the continuation of the congregation, it'll be important to foster, young families and have children that would grow up through the church as well. So, this is maybe a bit facetious, but if you invite more friends out, then we'll have more people that and maybe a larger donor base. But I guess to maintain. Have to have new people come and join the congregation as others leave. So, looking to more community outreach, looking at programming, try to encourage as many members to join and stay as we can. So, but yeah, no, it certainly is an ongoing concern, though, that as the congregation ages, then you're going to have a decline in membership.
Hi, I'm Marcia, and I guess I was going to say this in the open mic part of the agenda, but seeing as Scott has let us in, I'm just going to read what I prepared, because I do better with something prepared than talking off the cuff. I'd like to thank all of the people who wrote reports and crunched numbers for the AGM booklet, and also those people with leadership council positions that produced a video to accompany their written remarks. They were honest reports and with many pointed comments. They were inspiring and also sobering. Several years ago, there was an afternoon discussion here at the church with the seniors group about a book called Necessary Conversations. I attended with my parents. The concept of the book was to have necessary conversations about difficult conversations as we age. And I figure this space in open mic as a congregational meeting agenda is meant for people to share what is on their minds and their hearts. And I'd like to preface my comments with, math is not my skill set. And I don't share these thoughts first without looking at myself. I don't have the answer. And lastly, I'm very nervous to speak up about what I see as one of those necessary conversations as a church family. How do we, as a congregational family, talk openly about our future? And Scott was leading to that. When I review the chart in the booklet, the contributions by age report, it's concerning to me that out of 112 offering envelopes, 85 of those are in an age category of 61 years of age and older. It's simply raw financial data. And in reality, it isn't something that's brand new this year to the report book. And when I read that chart in tandem with the pastor's report in the booklet and Pastor Mark's reflection in this week's weekly newsletter about conversations at the Pastor's Week at Associated Mennonite Biblical Seminary in Indiana 2 weeks ago, it does give me pause when you read the financial raw data with what is happening in churches all across North America. Again, I don't have the answer, but I'm simply putting the feeling out there to see if there is an appetite within the congregation to have an open conversation about our future sustainability.
Thanks for your comments, Marcia. Yeah, and that's something that we can certainly look at leadership council and as a congregation is what would we like to do going forward? I guess as simple as that. Maybe one comment about the age of donors. I know it's been like that for a long time. One aspect might be that as you age, you might have more capacity for giving. I know you've got some kids that might be going to university, you've got a mortgage, and so the younger age brackets may not quite have the same capacity as giving. So as you age, there might be more funds available, and that may also contribute to some of the larger age group contributing more.
And I simply wanted to say, that was just a hard thing for me to say, and it is in no way a slight at any other age demographic for exactly what you just cited there.
Yeah. No, I'm not taking any offense. I just an observation as well. So.
Just a quick second to that, I think, of what Mush said. And where I would go to, which I think we've asked before, is Doug mentioned those percentages. And I get that the congregation never felt those were targets, but I think some of us did. And if they're not targets, they're at least a really good record. So I happen to look back at 2012 actual, which is 11 years ago now, I guess. And we were at 29.5% beyond ourselves. So that's the effect of the trends that a couple of people have talked about here of fewer members, less giving. It feels like this is the only place we can take it from. And it feels a little like this page is leftovers as opposed to first fruits. And like Pastor Kim said, I mean, 91,000 is still a lot of money. And maybe that's where we want to go. But to Marcia's point, we should talk about that and we should decide that. We shouldn't just be forced into it. Sorry, I do support this because I think it's the best we can do right now. I think my comments later will give some other ideas around how we can change the trends.
Yeah, there's certainly looking, I think from 2014, giving, I mean, there has been some fluctuations year to year, but it's been somewhat constant. And then as with inflation and salaries are rising, then if the amount of giving stays constant, then you have to be able to take from somewhere, and it happens to be the beyond ourselves. But hopefully this year, if we can decide as a congregation, but there is a little bit of potential wiggle room in the spending plan. So if there is a surplus, we could look to give back in the beyond ourselves, if that's what the congregation would like to do. So are there other kind of questions or comments related to the spending plan?
Thank you, Ryan. Larry Shantz. I just have one number that has to be changed here, and that's the website one. We do a 3-year hosting program, and this year happens to be the start of the 3-year. So we're going to have to add $500 to that line,
Okay.
because that's where it's going to end up at the end of the year.
Hi, I'm Miriam. Just adding to the conversation about trends, maybe it's obvious to everybody else too, but just to acknowledge and document that the impact of the COVID, of a global COVID pandemic, also is part of this and has impacted every other sort of organization and sector and schools and like everyone I talk to, both in my job and in personal life. So. Just thinking about coming out of that yet, and then when do we hit sort of our new normal or whatever?
Yes, certainly a period of transition. So what do we bring back from pre-pandemic? What are some things that we adapt post-pandemic? And so there'll be a bit of an adjustment as we transition.
Laura Wallace-Jervis. I'm sorry, I was stuck in the pew here. I just wanted to add on to what some other people have said. So I actually started in 2012 coming here. So seeing the trends has been interesting for me, because when we came in, the sanctuary was full. I was pregnant with my daughter, very pregnant. And but I'm also of a demographic of young families in our 30s and 40s, and we have a different set of issues that I'm recognizing for myself, and sort of speaking to other friends of mine in congregations across the city who are also struggling. This community has meant so much to me in the place that my family has been in, especially the last 2.5 years. And similarly, other friends of mine have felt the same about their congregations. So it seems to be, unless you're a really, really large church, there seems to be a trend of it being difficult to keep and retain young families for a variety of reasons. but the value of the community and the intergenerational relationships and the support that we have is why we've stayed and why some of my friends have stayed in their smaller churches. And you can't exchange that for something else. And I think that speculating, obviously I don't have research on this, but from people I've talked to and some of the studies I've done in school now, is that as we come out of the pandemic, those places are going to be really important for people to land. It's just a question of how do we support our community of people here as a congregation, and the families that are adjacent, maybe not coming regularly, but adjacent, and inviting others into that. And I think when I look at the last decade of me being here, I think we're actually really good at that. I think it's more of a reorganization. I can appreciate the fund piece, and I'm really glad to see that we are doing the things that we can do, and I think that's really good. Having only been here 10 years, I don't have the experience of other prosperousness, for lack of a better term. But I just wanted to frame what we're seeing here from my own experience. I've only been here a decade, and what you guys have meant to us.
I would agree with that too. The sense of community is really amazing. We're drawn as a family to the community that we experienced when we moved into St. Jacobs. So yeah, it's want to make sure we foster that and keep encouraging people to come, supporting them. Other comments, questions? All right, if not, we'll just... So with the adjustment of $500 to the website, can I have someone move to accept the 2023 spending plan? So Doris Bean. I have a seconder, Scott Morton Ninomia. All right, all in favor, raise your hand. All right, any opposed? No? All right, so that motion is carried, so thank you. All right, the next one is the appointment of the auditor. Tim, do you want to speak to that?
As we have been doing recently, Finance and Facilities would prefer to have the option of finalizing the choice of an auditor later in the year. I make the motion that the Finance and Facilities Ministry be given the option to choose a firm to be appointed to review our statement of financial position for 2023.
Can I have a seconder for that motion? Michael Litzman. All right, all in favor? Raise your hand. All right, any opposed? Okay, good, thanks. So that motion is carried. All right. All right, so that kind of concludes the standard business, and would like to put forward a couple of motions from Leadership Council. The first would be a recommendation towards hiring another pastor at 0.5 full-time equivalent, and the other would be approving the revisions to the bylaws. So we'll start with the pastoral hiring mandate. Maybe we'll just start with any questions or comments. I suppose I could go over a bit of a thought process. So a memo was circulated about a week or two ago, just highlighting the thought process that Leadership Council had in arriving at this recommendation. So the first was based on the survey results. We had a congregational meeting on February 5th. There was a good portion of people, about 60% of the respondents, had concerns about the financial implications of continuing with the current 2.25 full-time equivalent, and also the concern about declining membership. So based on that thought it would be appropriate to see a reduction in the full-time equivalent from 0.75, which was what Kevin is currently at, to 0.5 for a potential new hire. Looking at some neighboring congregations and speaking with Al Rempel with MCEC, typically there's about one full-time equivalent pastor per 100 members, and so being at 2 would be consistent with that. There's a few neighboring churches that also are in that 2 to 3 full-time equivalent with 2 or 3 pastors. So like Floridale, Elmira, Waterloo North, Sterling, First Kitchener, and Steinman. Some at part-time, some are, Steinman, for example, has 3 full-time pastors. Waterloo North, Sterling, First Kitchener have 3. Recognize that there's a good number of benefits to having a team model. If you think of the passage, a 3-corded rope is not easily broken. And so leveraging the skills and energies of 3 people can be beneficial. I could share a personal experience. Christine, my wife, she was part of a teaching team with 3 people. She's now been reduced to 2 because of the size of the classes that she's teaching. And it's been more of a challenge because when she hurt her knee, then her other partner teaching would have to pick up more. Her partner now has, families picked up COVID, so now she's had to pick up the slack. So by having the 3rd person, that allowed kind of shift time and energy around a little bit more easily. Currently, Mark is at 1.0 full-time equivalent, and Janet is at a half, and that was one of the questions that came up in the survey. We asked Janet if she'd be interested in increasing to 0.5, or from 0.5 to 1. And based on what Janet is currently doing, she preferred to stay at 0.5, so she's a spiritual director, sometimes holding retreats. And that can also be beneficial to the congregation as well, because that can bring in experiences that she can share with us as well. So that wasn't necessarily an option. And then there was a suggestion of hiring an interim pastor. According to MCEC guidelines, generally that's brought into when a congregation is in crisis, so there might be a kind of an issue that's dividing the congregation, or there's some conflict that's taking place, or there's a pastor suddenly passes away or has to be removed. Those don't necessarily, or do not apply to St. Jacob's. Or if there's a long-time single pastor that is, say, leaving, that they bring in an interim pastor. There's also a supply pastor, but that's more for a short and set period of time. So based on those guidelines, it didn't seem appropriate to bring in an intentional interim pastor, and it would also be kind of consistent with what St. Jacob's has done in the past, that the last number of pastoral transitions, there hasn't necessarily been an interim pastor. And then because of the potential time it might take to hire somebody, thought it would be better to act sooner rather than later. So that's kind of the thought process that was behind putting together this recommendation. So maybe I'll just open it up again for any comments or questions, and then we can go through the vote. So are there any questions or comments?
Melody Morton, Ninomia. I'm just wondering if there's the possibility of posting it as a flexible appointment, such that if someone was a really good fit, but working half-time is just not feasible for them or their family, is the option of having it be negotiable between 0.5 and 0.75. Is that even something we can consider?
I suppose when we're putting together the ad, that would be something to consider. I guess it would just be yeah, whether we want to commit to that 0.75 potential cost. The overall kind of salary will be dependent on kind of education levels and levels of experience. So if you're looking to hire someone who's maximized the education levels and more senior, then that'll be more expensive. If you have someone who's just starting out, there might, even at 0.75, they could be similar to a more experienced half-time. So maybe we'll leave that to staff relations. We can talk about that, how we want to put together the ad. Yeah, we'll have to kind of see who's interviewing or applying.
Hi, Doris Bean, and I'm going to speak on as the Staff Relations Chair for now, not as a congregational member. I just want to point out that, so I understand the decision-making and some of the fiscal thinking around this. Of course, that's really important. I do want to point out that, as has been noted several times, and as we can see looking through the report booklet, that volunteerism has been down. And so I know that that has meant that our pastoral staff has picked up some of that slack on occasion, or maybe even fairly regularly. Something just to think about. We heard about the challenge of young families, et cetera. I personally, even though I'm not in that age bracket anymore, I think that's a really important part. Something to think about if we really want a lot of time and energy put into that. Again, that's something that will be impacted by, cutting some of the hours potentially. I had a lot of thoughts and I didn't write them down, so. But anyways, these are just some of the things I want you to think about. And the fact that in the ebb and flow of congregational life, the pastoral workloads go up and down depending on what's going on. Things like marriages, death, all kinds of things that go on in our congregation really impact the amount of work that any pastor may or may not do. And finally, if we do end up with somebody with a lot less experience, there will be a requirement of a lot of mentoring, et cetera, from our experienced pastors. This is just food for thought. This is not my personal thoughts. This is just as Staff Relations Chair, just to think about some of these things as we make this very important decision.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. Yeah, there's certainly lots of implications to whatever we decide to do.
Hi, Brent Hurst again. And I do hesitate to say what I'm about to say, not because I don't hesitate to talk, obviously, but I think this might be the first time that I would vote against a leadership proposal, and I feel I have to vote against this at this point, and I just want to explain my rationale. Because I think your rationale that you went through makes a lot of sense, but I also think the trends in giving and membership and all the other stuff makes sense as well. I have a page written down that I could read, but I think to sum it up, let's just think for a minute, nirvana, that Kevin didn't resign and didn't choose to move to Manitoba. I think even in that situation, we would be having some tough discussions. Can we sustain the FTE that we have? In fact, your survey clearly answered that no. So we'd have a tough discussion to have when we have Kevin, Mark, and Janet sitting here, and we have to somehow reduce that or give more. So now we have this opportunity, and if we just follow this motion, we're going to have 3 people in a year, 2 years, 5 years, and we'll have that tough discussion based on the current trends that we're seeing. And I don't want to have that discussion. I want to have the discussion with the congregation before we hire another person and add to the team. And this is not anti-leadership, this is not anti-pastors. They are all busy. I understand what Doris just said, I agree with that. But now's an opportunity to have other discussions and other options other than this.
Yeah. Thanks, Brent. Yeah, there's certainly a lot to weigh. Recognize that the pastors are busy, but this is an opportunity, and that's why we, as Leadership Council, we're looking to get congregational input and putting forward this recommendation, but certainly open for more discussion.
Matthew Kane. We've only been here a couple of years, but it was mentioned earlier with regards to the finance that a lot of the donations are coming from sort of the slightly older crowd, and the way to change that is to potentially bring in younger families to bolster that. We have found that Kevin in particular has been very supportive and very engaged with the younger families, or us in particular in any case. And our concern is that, or my concern is that by reducing that position further, is there going to be that same support for those younger families coming in? And if there isn't, how does the congregation expect to bring in those younger families? It is one thing to look at the numbers and say, we can't support it, so therefore we should reduce it. But to be honest, is it a slight to say to Kevin, hey, your job is being reduced, you know, we can't support it? Well, I know he's leaving, but that idea, and I feel uncomfortable by that, particularly as sort of a path to move forward, a path to sort of grow, potential to grow. It seems sort of backwards going in my sense. So be cautious of that.
Thanks.
Hello, Chuck Kruger. I understand what Brent said, and I wouldn't want to have a difficult conversation a few years down the road, but I'd rather have that conversation and have a pastor who could give energy to help bolstering our congregation. When I read Kevin's report and all the new ways of thinking that are coming along with keeping our youth and children alive in the church, I see a tremendous amount of organization and time spent with the other congregations. That all takes a lot of energy and time, and so I would support the 0.5.
Ernie Fretz, with all the discussion that's going here tonight, I think we should have a ballot vote instead of a show of hand vote. I think there'd be a little bit more people looking around, seeing who put their hands up for and those that would be putting their hands up for or against.
Yeah, we can certainly move to a ballot vote. So maybe we'll continue with the discussion. That is an option. So why don't we continue with the discussion, and then we can put forward the motion to move to a ballot vote, which actually we are prepared to do. So.
Hello, everyone. Michael Lutzman. First, I wanted to say I know how much discernment goes on at both staff relations and at Leadership Council, and it's difficult when it comes to a vote like this, and we have a lot more limited information than you do at LC. But, and I don't mind saying out loud that I can't support this motion, and I'm disappointed that it's going to go from 7.5 to 50. And I noticed that the 0.75 is supported by the 2023 spending plan, so I'm a little confused by that. So it looks as though we can afford it, and I really think it's working exceptionally well, and I don't know why we would fix it if it ain't broke. And I think it's really important that we support ourselves individually as a church as well as Beyond Ourselves, and I think our Beyond Ourselves is still extremely robust despite the $10,000 reduction. So I think it's important that we spend here as well.
Yeah, just as a clarification on the spending plan, because we weren't sure what the direction would be in terms of this motion or what the hiring process might be, thought we would just particularly with Kevin being here for the first half of the year, that we would just continue with that. You know, it's easier to budget to a higher amount and underspend than to have a lower amount and then try to make up for that difference. So because of the uncertainties, was kind of what we decided to do, is stick with the 0.75 for this year. And then pending the outcome of this vote, then we can adjust the spending plan for 2024 as appropriate.
Sandy Shantz. I have mixed feelings. The one thing I don't have mixed feelings about, though, is the importance of a 3-pastor team. I think that's worked really well for us. We've talked about the young families and the importance of I don't want to say catering to them, but to speaking to them. I also think a 3-pastor team gives a nice mix of skill sets and opportunities for all of us really to find a fit that works for us. So I'm really in favor of the 3-pastor team. I would support a 3/4 time, staying with 3/4 time, just because of the energy that's taken from our volunteers, and I know a lot of us are burnt out, and it's getting more difficult, and that puts more time on the pastor. So I would support a 3/4 time, but I'm not sure how we proceed with that vote. I guess if we were to vote this down, someone would have to put another motion. Is that correct?
Yeah, I suppose we could revise the motion to 0.75 perhaps if there's enough in favor, but maybe we'll have to do the ballot vote, and then we'll have to get some input then as to why, if this motion is not passed, why that motion did not pass, and maybe look to put forward like say a revised motion at 0.75. So I guess there's a couple of things that is it the 0.5 that's the contentious issue? Is it the hiring of a 3rd pastor? Is that the issue? And so it might be a little bit difficult to separate that out.
I mean, I'll also say as a member of Leadership Council, I can also support the decision that Leadership Council made as a whole group. So that's where I'm a little conflicted.
Thanks, Scott Morton. You know me. I don't think I introduced myself before. I wonder with this if we could look at possibilities like talking to other congregations and possibly hiring a pastor to share across, like a full-time pastor to share across a few congregations. You'd have youth groups, cross-pollinating. You'd have that other skill set. I know there'd be other issues with somebody working across 2 different congregations. I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but other congregations, I'm sure, are having similar discussions to the ones we're having right now. So are there ways that we could work with them to get the best of both worlds? People out there, if they have a young family themselves, they might say, I want a full-time job. So that could be a possibility. I know it makes things more complicated for this vote and just in general, but it might be a possible solution to look at.
And I think there'd be some flexibility in how we post the job ad, if that's what we end up doing, that, if you say post at 0.5, would be open to sharing duties is something that may be added to the job ad. So yeah, there's lots of trade-offs. Certainly by going to a full-time, there'd be more the economic side of things, the financials. If you go to the half-time, there might also be possibilities that someone may not have the full-time that they want to devote, and having that half-time allows them to explore other opportunities or continue with those opportunities and join the pastoral team. So yeah, there's always lots of trade-offs with that. So.
Doreen Jansen, I'm just wondering, just a minute. do we want to just assume that things are getting smaller, we have less people, we have less money? Or do we want to be brave and step forward and look ahead as if things are going to be growing and work towards that growth? That's my question.
No, that's certainly a very good question that we could be aspirational and look what can we do to support, say, the current situation, or not, I guess.
Good morning, Linda Kruger. I'm not asking for this input now, but I am wondering if our pastors have had input into how workable they feel a reduced FTE would be in their work.
Yes, so we have been getting pastoral input, and there is a recognition that, like, the current FTE, that they're busy, but there is a bit of space as well. So it's not like they're, you know, I'm not quite sure what the best way to say this, but they're not like always, this isn't the best term, but like under the gun, and they always have to be going, that there is a little bit of space for creativity. Reducing the FTE would be an adjustment, but you know, they're open to making that adjustment, and there would, you know, some things would have to change, obviously, because you have fewer number of hours that are devoted to the tasks that need to be completed. But yeah, that the pastoral team is open. They did stress they do like the pastoral team model, so I think trying to maintain that would be important as well. And I don't know if like Mark or Janet want to add anything at all. Yeah. You don't have to if you don't want to. That's fine.
Excuse me, Larry Shantz. A couple of things before I make my comments. First of all, I'd like to thank Leadership Council for bringing this forward. When Wendy left, it was automatically assumed that we were going to replace her. And so to bring this discussion forward, I'd like to thank Leadership Council for that. And I know that our pastors are all doing a good job, but I have to also hop on the back of Brent when he makes his comments as well. And I'm wondering, we've got half a year before Kevin leaves, and I wonder if we can have a further discussion rather than make the decision today, whether we can have more discussions in either groups or whatever, and try and work it out a little bit longer than just a half an hour discussion at an annual meeting. It's a pretty big decision, and like Brent said, if we hired someone and, you know, we find out in 5 years we can't afford them, then some pretty tough decisions have to be made. And I'm wondering if we could work it out that we wait for a half a year, have some of those further discussions, and then maybe we can run with only 2 pastors for the remainder of the half a year, and then decide next year's budget whether we want to add that 3rd person in or not. It's just a suggestion. We haven't brought the motion forward at this point, but that would be a motion that I'd bring forward.
Yeah, there's certainly kind of, go through the hiring process, there would be time. And so, you know, depending on how that plays out, that could extend much further than just the 6 months. And so that would be an additional complication. The pastoral team can kind of support maybe a short term, a few months, but if that gets extended beyond that, then it'll be a little bit more difficult for the pastoral team to handle kind of the 2-pastor team going forward.
Ryan Martin, I'm also on LC, and yeah, these are difficult decisions and conversations that I'm glad you guys are bringing forward and I want to have as well. And since we are talking about a half-time versus a full-time, I'm not as concerned about hiring somebody in potentially half a year. You know, it's still, no, that's still kind of flexible work, and I think we need to replace Kevin. And but I also want to have these conversations too. And so just to, you know, hash out some potential directions in the future for this church. I like both ideas.
Hi, I'm Sarah Kane, and like Mathieu said, we haven't been here for very long, but I just wanted to share some things that we've noticed that we think you're doing right. So I noticed, well, part of what drew us here was the intergenerational stuff, and things like the Bibles to the kids and the prayer shawls for the teenagers. And what we noticed is that there may not be many, but no churches have many unless they're a big mega church, and then you don't always know what the health of the relationship to God is with the young people. And it seems like even if people are going away, they're staying in a church. They're not angry and leaving, like some of our previous experiences are. There is a lot of distrust of Christians right now in the younger people, partly due to like the discovery of the Indigenous children's graves, and partly from, I don't know what else to call it other than religious trauma, where people have been hurt in the church by people who should have been keeping them safe. And so this is the fight that we're fighting when we talk about wanting to bring new families in. And there's also, in previous generations, church was normal. People would go to church and like that was just normal, and even if like the children weren't going to church, it was still like maybe they'd go with their grandparents. But now we're seeing several generations where church isn't talked about, and so they're only getting what's in the headlines. So I think that your church is amazing, and it feels safe, and you're doing some of the right things. But we do have to be cognizant that this is where society is going in terms of the view of Christians. And I think it needs a lot of prayer, and I do think that another pastor could help bridge that gap. Oh, and we talked to somebody at the pancake dinner, and he was like, you know, it'd be great, ball hockey in the summertime in your big parking lot. So that's just something that could maybe be run. But again, fewer volunteers and a younger pastor would help and might have energy to get things like that going.
Thanks. It's a good reminder to, you know, the things that we can do well and are doing well. And
Laura Wallace-Jarvis. I'm just going to take on what Sarah said. She and I have actually had a couple conversations about this, but I wanted to share something this week. So I am involved in the homeschool community. A homeschool community in KW, Kitchener-Waterloo, Cambridge, surrounding St. James, Woolwich area, has been primarily a Christian community. And it's not so much anymore, and even amongst the Christian community, there's been quite a few divisions related to some of it church trauma, some of it to COVID, some of it to all those things. And then there's a lot of what we would refer to, even though I don't love this term, as secular families taking their kids out of school because of some of the situations that are happening in school during COVID. So this week we got, I homeschool with a whole bunch of people from all different places. That's what I'm trying to tell you. A vast population with a lot of kids. And I got into a conversation this week with a number of moms about how to teach our kids values, how to teach about compassion and social justice. And they know I go to church and I talk about my faith, and I talk about I'm not very religious, but I do have a strong faith. And they said, "Oh, where do you go?" And I said, "I go to St. Jacob's Mennonite." "Oh, the Mennonites." And I said, and I'm always like, I didn't grow up Mennonite, so I don't know what that means. And they said, and then I got this story about one of the families lives beside the Mennonites, and they're like really good people, Laura. They're like really into social justice and relevant topics and compassion. And then another family talked about their other Mennonite neighbors, so we're out there. Anyways, I mentioned this because a lot of what they talked about from their childhood, and they're all my sort of demographic of mid-30s to mid-40s parents, is the trauma of going to church. And again, I don't know what that looks like, but I also agree that a 3-pastor team, I think, is going to be really important as we move forward into the sort of the next leap. Again, I haven't been here long enough to know what the ebb and flow looks like of the church, being only here a decade. But again, I also think that what we're actually dealing with, if we're looking at ministry, and it's clear that missions is important to us, we need to look at another person who can facilitate, even if all 3 pastors are working on it, can really focus in on the needs of the community, not just this community in St. Jacobs, but the communities are greater, whether it's in Woolwich or whether it's in Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, and the people that want to attend.
Miriam again. I'm not an expert in Robert's rules, but I'm wondering if I can propose a motion to defer the vote on this particular piece and maybe arrange another time during service or separately. It's just sounding to me like it's more complex, like there needs to be a vote on whether 3 or not, and timeline, and a couple other things, and maybe people like others want to ponder everything they've heard today like I do, and I don't know if I can do that in the middle of this, I forget.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of gone a little bit backwards from Robert's rules in that we've had the discussion before putting forward the motion, I guess in anticipation of there being a fair bit of conversation. We can certainly do that if want to put forward a motion to defer the vote. Maybe we can amend it as well to move to a ballot vote in the future. Would there be a seconder for? Okay, so I guess Miriam. So we'll puts forward the motion to defer or table the vote, move to a ballot vote at a later time, and I guess so Larry Shantz second that motion, and so maybe is there discussion about that motion? Let's see.
I'd like to see more specifics on when that might happen, not to leave it too open-ended.
So would, I guess Leadership Council is meeting March 30th. We could try to meet earlier. Is there a particular time frame that would be suitable for?
I mean, I could amend my motion to say to readjourn, what's the right word? And regroup within a month.
So we'll gather in about a month's time, so maybe early April. That will give us Leadership Council a chance to meet and discuss what we might do moving forward.
I just had a quick thought around, yeah, I agree that it makes sense to move forward quickly because just to keep somebody, to have somebody come on board so that the pastors who are left are not just kind of at loose ends, until we figure all this out. And one way we could do that is to give ourselves more time to figure out what is clearly a complicated thing by hiring an interim pastor on a 1-year contract to just keep keep the pastoral team at 3 and then figure out what the pastoral team looks like in a long term. Anyway, people are already shaking their heads, so maybe that's a terrible idea.
All right, so we'll have the move to defer a vote to, say, a month from now, or say early April, and then we'll move to a ballot vote. So we'll organize a congregational meeting for early April, and that'll be kind of the motion. We've got, I guess, put forward.
I don't know if deferring the vote is sufficient enough, because it sounds like people want to have more conversation about it. So I don't know if that also needs to be put in the motion, that there's further conversation.
Yeah, so we can schedule another congregational meeting for a discussion related to this motion. And then I guess at which point then we can either hold the vote, or if we put it to a ballot vote, then we could extend some time there as well. People can vote.
And I just wanted to throw in 2 observations about what I noticed today and my appreciation for this congregation. And the one I've already said before from previous congregational meetings, how I appreciate how we can disagree with each other and have respectful conversation. The second one that I want to note is that this congregation used to be only Martin, Bauman's, Chaunce's, and sorry if I'm missing any other major. I thought, yeah. And I took a note of, who seconded or made the motions, and we had Morton and Amia's and Lutzman's and Wallace Jarvis's talking, and so I think that's just a great sign for where our church is going.
I think you could maybe fine-tune your survey again, too, before the next meeting. There seems to be confusion around that. I guess stats are like that. Everybody reads into them what they want. To me, that was pretty clear that 2.25 was not acceptable to the majority of the congregation, but I see some other people not agreeing with that. So now that you've heard some more discussion, we've talked about interim, we've talked about contract, we've talked about deferring a bit, maybe we could get a survey first before that next congregational meeting and have a bit more broader input to people that don't feel like they want to talk at meetings like this. But I strongly encourage the deferral at this point, and look forward to more discussion.
We could look putting out a survey. There seems to be a number of moving parts with this. One is the full-time equivalent, so perhaps we'll have to just be more explicit about what full-time equivalent. I guess the other is how many pastors, whether is another possibility, and then I guess the time frame as well. I mean, there's certainly challenges to bring someone on board for a short period of time, take some time and effort, and then to do that again soon after will require energy from the pastoral team, congregation as well. But if that's kind of where people want to head to, then perhaps we can consider that as well. But yeah, it's been difficult to try to figure out where the, I guess the objection to this motion is exactly. Whether it's the hiring of somebody at all, is it the full-time equivalent, or if there's some other reasons. So taking the time to pause and collect our thoughts will be good. So maybe we'll leave discussion on that element. So maybe Lori, can you maybe just restate the motion if you've got something, and then we'll put it to a vote.
Doesn't sound very official.
Yeah.
At this point, I don't have it super nailed down, so I was going to ask for a clarification. So right now I just have kind of general. motion to defer a vote on this issue to early April, so the vote is early April, and to use a ballot vote. I don't know if we need to say something about like further discussion, further contact with the congregation. I'm not sure.
We'll schedule another congregational meeting at that time.
And is that in the motion?
Yeah, we could add that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I would have defer a vote on this issue to early April with further congregational feedback, or and use a ballot vote at a later time. And that was, I don't know, that was originally Miriam. I don't know if that's okay.
You're okay with that? So
Okay.
Miriam will put forward that amended motion.
And Larry, are you still seconding?
Okay.
Okay.
We've got a seconder. All right. All right, so all in favor, you raise your hand. All right. Okay, any opposed? All right, so that motion is carried. So we'll, Leadership Council have some work to do. We'll put together, or we'll meet, and we'll organize another congregational meeting and vote for April. So the other item then is the bylaw revisions. I know we're getting close to 12:30. Maybe we could table this to another time, unless, I guess if there's going to be lots of questions, we can certainly table this to another time. If everyone is comfortable with the proposed revisions to the bylaws, we can have a vote and accept those revisions. What are people's feelings on the acceptance of the revised bylaws? Call the vote? Okay, certainly do that. Well, I guess, Laverne, you put forward the motion to, is there a seconder? Okay, Laura? And is there any discussion about the proposed revisions to the bylaws? So there was a summary of the main changes, mostly updating to reflect the current practices. All right, well, if there are no questions or comments, we'll put it to a vote. So all in favor of accepting the revised bylaws? All right, good. Any opposed? Okay, that motion is carried too. All right, thanks everyone. So that kind of, well, I guess that concludes kind of the business portion. We do have an open mic. We've had lots of discussion. Is there anyone that would like to share?
Linda Kruger, I promise I'll make this really brief. I think with the children's story that Kevin shared and the conversation we had, and bringing our gifts and recognizing the trends in demographic and giving, I was reminded of a conversation I had with my parents many years ago. Our kids were young, expenses were high, and I was wishing we could contribute more financially to something that had come up in church. And my parents said, you need to remember, and they experienced this as well, that at a certain point, we are able to give more of our time, perhaps, than financially. And so not to underestimate the value that we were offering and the way we were sharing our gifts of time. And I looked briefly at our slate, and the number of people in the 30 to 40 and early 50 demographic that are in significant leadership roles in our church and providing wonderful leadership is really appreciated and noted. And so I just remembered that conversation with my parents, that there are times in our life when it's easier for us to share of our time than it is financially, and that's absolutely okay.
Yeah, there's certainly, the gifts of time, the gifts of money are really important for a healthy congregation. And so whatever time or money that people are willing to give, that is much appreciated. there other questions or comments? All right, well, I think we'll then close the business portion of the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for all your input, feedback. There's certainly lots to think about. We'll have some more conversations. And I guess I'll let Janet come up then and kind of end with a prayer and closing song. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan, for your leadership through that part of the meeting. I do have 4 announcements to highlight at this point, and I'll try and be brief as well. I know you've been sitting for a long time. If you feel like you need to stand up and stretch while I give the announcements, please feel free to do that. You are warmly invited to stay after church today to enjoy a simple meal of breads and spreads, gathered as a community around tables in the basement, and there is enough for all. So even if you didn't plan to stay or didn't bring bread to the service, you are most welcome to stay. And we'll head downstairs shortly after we close here. We are a music-loving church, so this afternoon you can come on back to the church at 2:30 p.m. for a book launch. We are hosting Carla Clausen here in the sanctuary to launch her new book called These Songs We Sing, Reflections on Hymns We Have Loved. Carla's a church musician from Ottawa Mennonite Church, and she blogs regularly on various hymns and has focused on voices together in the last while, and then she creates a piano arrangement of the song. And the event this afternoon will combine a live performance of some of these piano arrangements with selected readings from her book. And this is a pay-what-you-can event to cover costs. And there's good energy percolating in Mennonite circles around celebrations of the 500th anniversary of Anabaptism in 2 years, and there are some creative projects underway already. And this coming Wednesday at 4 p.m. here at the church, at 4 p.m., you're invited to join a Zoom call with Professor Carl Koop from Canadian Mennonite University, and his presentation is called Reconsidering Anabaptist History After 500 Years. This is an opportunity to turn a bit of a curious and reflective eye on our Anabaptist Mennonite heritage of faith. This will be a Zoom event, so you can watch it from home. And if you don't have internet access at home, you're welcome to come to the church. We will have access set up here in the library. And one more thing to note. This past week, many people around the world marked Ash Wednesday, the beginning of the season of Lent, and our journey with Jesus toward Holy Week, the Cross, and Easter Sunday. And as a way to mark this significant season in the church year, you are invited to come to the church for the next 6 Thursday evenings to be part of a Lent journey group. We will explore the scriptures for Lent through music and prayer and quiet time for reflection and sharing around a circle. We'll meet for an hour from 6:30 to 7:30, and we'll meet in one of the side rooms off the gathering room upstairs, and all are welcome. And if you can't make it to all of them, that's okay. Come when you can. We've spent a good deal of time already this morning talking about how we manage and share our resources, and so we want to take time now to give thanks for the gifts that have been shared today and for the time and effort put in on our behalf to manage them well so that they can be used for good purposes across the street and around the world. So I'd like to invite the ushers to come forward as we offer a prayer of thanks and listen to Laura play. So let's offer our prayer. Thanks be to God. And I invite the ushers forward. want to open it up now to share joys and concerns from our own lives that we want to bring to the congregation for prayer. Mark, do you still have a mic? He can bring that around. If you have something you'd like to name at this point for prayer. And I might just say to begin this, I think this echoes what Chip said, for respectful sharing and good conversation this morning, even when we differ and disagree, let's offer a prayer of thanks. Thanks be to God. And for trustworthy, capable leadership, let's also offer a prayer of thanks. Thanks be to God. Is there anything else anyone would like to share? If not, then I invite us into a time of prayer. Generous God, we remember your promises at creation. All that you have created and all that you have provided, it is very good, and there is enough for all. For this goodness and abundance, we are grateful. May we live with attentive and thankful hearts. And we also remember the invitation from Jesus to seek first the kingdom of God and its righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. With Jesus as our example and guide, help us to shift and align our priorities to match your initiatives and your mission, God, so that we are not preoccupied with getting and accumulating, with keeping and preserving what we have for us and ours alone. Transform our hearts until the needs of our siblings and our global family become our own needs, and we see the resources we have as gifts to share with joy. Give us eyes to see and ears to hear the mystery and wonder of the good news of Jesus, so that like Jesus' disciples in the story of the loaves and fishes, we no longer focus on scarcity and limitations and what we lack, but instead we value what we have and see its potential. We get caught up in the joy of multiplication. We delight in stories of abundance. Help us to recognize the gifts we have to share and the gifts others in this community have to share. Send us out with generous hands to share the loaves and fishes of our lives, trusting that there is enough for all, with leftovers to spare. Amen.
For our closing song, please turn to 830, Go My Children, and we will sing verses 1 and 3. Please stand.